in a paper of yours that I read called Narrativity and Meaning in Life, you replace the dumbfounding question, what is the meaning of life, with what is the meaning in life. So how do you understand that question?
Here's one answer, which is Susan Wolf's very influential answer. Let me see if I can find that. What did she say?
Yes, actually has, we excerpted something by Susan Wolf in the Norton Anthology, The Meaning of Life.
Life, I think she
chapter,
said,
but I didn't assign it, unfortunately.
Okay, I think she thinks that for life have meaning is for you to have a subjective interest in something that is objectively worthwhile or interesting. That's what gives a life meaning. That's her answer. I just tried to take meaning as literally as possible. And I said a life, meaning is going to co-vary with interest. So if the life is interesting, then I'm going to call it meaningful.
So would an interesting, hence meaningful life be one in which someone was fascinated by counting blades of grass or by pushing a rock up a hill and watching it roll down again? Presumably that wouldn't count as a meaningful life according to Susan Wolf, but...
That's right. So, well, I think she's right about that, unless I'm contradicting myself by saying that. On the other hand, I think that one shouldn't think that things like being an artist or a writer are somehow superior to being a farmer. I'd be very worried about any kind of lexical ranking of ways of life that put some above others in that kind of way.
But if I did lead a life of grass blade counting or something pointless like that, that I nonetheless took pleasure in, you would want to say that my life, that there is no meaning in my life in the relevant sense.
It's not interesting. So yeah, so I would, once we're talking about meaning in life or meaning of life, the word meaning is pulling us all the time away from its basic meaning. The meaning of meaning.
Right.
And we're thinking of something that's just justifies or confers value. And I think it's almost impossible not to hear the word in a way that goes beyond how we should, I think, hear it. But that's fine. Let's just accept that.
Now, one thing that you've written quite a bit about in an extremely hostile manner is the idea that our lives form some kind of narrative or story-like structure, or at any rate, they have to in order for our lives to be meaningful.
Can I adjust that straight
away?
Please
adjust that, yes.
Yeah, it's not that they should form such a thing. I mean, I actually think that you could write a good biography of anyone, in fact, maybe even of a horse. So it's what I'm hostile to is the idea that you can't live a good life unless you think of your own life in some kind of way as a story or a narrative. It's very specific.
Right. Okay, right. Sorry, my mistake. You're right. So of course, everyone's life has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I mean, one is born and one does a few things, steps on the hamster wheel for a while, and then one dies. And so in that sense, everyone's life is a narrative or a story, or in other words, everyone has a biography.
Yeah, but I already hate that because narratives and stories are kind of representations of things, and I'm already bothered by the fact that we put just there's a real series of events into calling it anyway. Okay.
Oh, okay. But the crucial claim that you want to argue against is that you have to conceive of your own life. The person has to conceive of her own life as some kind of narrative or story.
Yes. So I don't know what that means for people who believe in eternal life, because there ain't going to be no end. You want to put
I guess, I mean, just like some television series, they seem to go on interminably with until they finally jump the shark, perhaps. But I mean, certainly, of course, you could imagine some, series of novels just going on forever.
No, I've actually think that's a good case, because people always trot out that thing about beginning, middle, and end. And there are EastEnders in England,
Yes, exactly.
Coronation Street, just they began in the middle of things, and they don't need to have an ending to be narratives.
Right, right, right. Okay, so what is wrong with the narrative view? So you have a number of great quotes expressing the narrative view. One is from Oliver, the writer and Dr. Oliver Sacks. I think this is from The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Each of us constructs and lives a narrative. The narrative is us, our identities. So on the one hand, there does seem to be something appealing about that thought. It can't just be nonsense because so many people have had it or found it attractive.
Yes. I think this is a real, one of those great dividers in the human race, perhaps. There are people who have, and I do actually think that most of the people who've written about this positively have been themselves the kind of people who find it attractive. But actually, one thing worth saying here, which I hadn't discovered when I first started writing about it, is that psychologists and philosophers mean something completely different by identity. So psychologists mean your self-conception. So it fits much better with what Oliver Sacks says as a psychologist. Whereas philosophers, I think, mean really, as it were, your true nature. Would you think, does that sound right to you? Your identity, how you really are, which you might not know much about.
Right, right.
But so to the extent that when psychologists say that, they mean, as it were, the picture you have of yourself, then it's to that extent more plausible. But even then, I don't think that my picture of myself, such as it is, has any kind of narrative quality. It doesn't depend. I am who I am as a result of my past to a considerable extent, but that doesn't mean that I have to be thinking about it or even remember it much, which would be part of what having a narrative attitude to my life would have to involve. And I just don't think I have that.
I think one of your points is that the narrative picture, or the idea that one has to see one's life as some sort of story in order for it to have significance, is a result of people projecting their own somewhat idiosyncratic, or at any rate not universal, psychology onto the rest of us.
I think that, but I also think that it's kind of a recipe for self-deception. Actually, so I'm a kind of Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre is on my side here.
Yes,
I always quote him. He says, "Shall I quote him?"
Please.
Man, he says, a man. He means a person. I'll try. A person is always a teller of stories. They live surrounded by their own stories and those of other people. They see everything that happens to them in terms of these stories, and they try to live their life as if they were recounting it. And then he says, but one has to choose to live or to tell stories. So for Sartre, this whole thing is mauvaise foi.
Yeah, bad faith.
Or inauthenticity
Yes.
in Heidegger's term. And that's probably going too far the other way, but that at least gives you a clear picture of how one might object to this.
And also, I suppose what do you think of this idea that if the sort of emphasis is on constructing a narrative in which you're the central character, and this is a crucial part of leading some meaningful or significant human life, then that seems to be rather self-absorbed and to put all the focus on oneself as opposed to other people.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they could reply that you could do it without becoming too self-obsessed. I'm tempted at this point to raise a considerable problem for myself. Shall I do that?
Please, yes, yes.
Okay.
That was always there. Right,
Well,
right.
you might well
Spoken like a true philosopher.
Yeah. One fact: Socrates is the man. As you well know, as almost everyone knows, he said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and you might think that that would imply having some sort of narrative attitude to your own life, as it were, to assessing your life. And
presumably you can examine your own life. I mean, merely to examine your own life or to reflect on your own actions or your career or your relationships is not thereby to see it as having some kind of narrative structure.
Right, right. That's right. So feeling you did something bad and reflecting on it,
yes,
is not already to put you in the narrative camp. And there is, I would also say that there is no, it could equally be well something, it could equally well be something somebody else did that made you sit up and think about certain kinds of actions and how good or bad they were. So it doesn't require focus on the self, oneself, and it doesn't require this specifically narrative thing, which must require, as it were, considerable diachronic or temporal extent.